This season, our theme is Healthy Screen Habits Heroes. And as we all know, heroes can come in many forms. So, the hero I'm featuring this week is someone who truly moved the needle for us all. As the Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen deserves a seat in the highest court of the Do the Right Thing Justice League. When I had the opportunity to speak with Frances, she was incredibly generous with her time. So generous that I am going to do something I have never done before. That is, break this episode into two parts. It's just such a fascinating conversation. You'll want to hear it all. You're going to want to listen to both episodes. Welcome to the Healthy Screen Habits Podcast. I'm Hillary Wilkinson. Whether you're starting your parenting journey with a newborn or looking to connect with your teen on technology, let's learn some new healthy screen habits together. In soccer, there's the World Cup. In entertainment, there's the Academy Awards. In digital wellness, there was one event that had people canceling meetings and postponing appointments in 2021. We were all glued to our devices, radios, TVs, anything. And today's guest is the reason why. On October 5th, the Facebook whistleblower testified in front of the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee. For 3.5 hours, we watched on C-SPAN as this data scientist, who is a Harvard graduate, an expert of algorithmic product management, and an Iowan daughter of two professors, stood up for the world. So 2 days before, her identity had been unmasked on 60 Minutes as she gave an interview which revealed herself as the source behind tens of thousands of pages of internal documents and the source behind the Wall Street Journal's Facebook files. Facebook's awareness and complicity in radicalization and political violence around the world, as well as the disregard given to users' mental health, were now public knowledge to us all. I am thrilled you are here. Welcome to Healthy Screen Habits, Frances Haugen.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Frances, we have a lot of families who are followers, and I'm positive so many parents are wondering right now, what were you like as a kid? Like, what did you like to do?
So I foolishly ate some peanuts like right before I started this interview. And so I have a little tickle in my throat.
No problem.
So I grew up in Iowa, and I definitely, it's fascinating for me to kind of see what childhoods are like today, because I grew up in a pretty safe community. My parents were open-minded, and it meant that I could wander around town. So, I started having what is now obvious in retrospect, some mild neurological deficits. So I started having a little bit of trouble walking when I was 7. And my parents bought me a bus pass and let me wander around town by myself instead of going to day camp. And I'm really, really grateful that both I was a level-headed enough kid, and that my parents saw that I got to have a very open and kind of expansive childhood. I really liked building things. So I used to do everything from building, doll houses out of, foam and felt and stuff to I learned very basic circuitry in, elementary school. Our science class, learned how to light up light bulbs and with batteries and wires and stuff like that. So I had fun building models and stuff like that. We had a very extensive garden, and I really liked gardening because my parents are both avid gardeners. And so, I had a childhood that was not super online until maybe I was 12 or 13, because no one was really online.
Mm-hmm. So kind of standing up for what you believed in was critical in this whole whistleblower path / journey that you were very brave to take on. So was there anything in your upbringing that drafted this strong stance of right and wrong?
I think probably the foundational experiences that influenced the course that I eventually took was I was really lucky to grow up in a school district that took high school debate really, really seriously. And so when I was in high school, I did high school debate for all 4 years. I was the novice debate coach starting my junior year. So I coached the junior high debate program, which I found out is still going today. Like I ran the first junior high debate program when I was I guess a junior. Yeah, when I was a junior, and so high school debate, for those who never did it, you learn both about issues around how the world operates, but you also, depending on the style of debate you do, also learn a lot about ethics and philosophy. And I went on in college to coach high school debate. And so it meant that I had to get really, really clear on like, what did I believe? Because I needed to be able to teach it in a clear enough way that, 14-year-olds could understand. And that's like for anyone who's ever parented a 14-year-old, that's another level of clarity.
Right, right. This is so interesting because I can kind of see this, how this framework of backgrounds of like systems understanding, like as a kid, putting things together, building things, and then the debate kind of honing your critical thinking capabilities. I don't know. I love human development. So it's,
I think another one of the like subtle ways. So when I was in my early 20s and I was at Google, like I remember when I first was in search quality at Google, there were very, very few women. And I would agonize over like, why aren't there people, where are the other people who look like me? Right. Like there'd be blonde men. Why are there no blonde women? Right. Um, and one of the realizations I had at some point was because I struggled, it wasn't all the time, but like I had a long series of recurrent ankle injuries
oh,
because I didn't know it. And I talk about this in the book. Like I was severely malnourished from celiacs. And your body can't heal if you're not getting enough nutrients in. I spent a lot of time indoors playing with computers, instead of going out to recess because I didn't want to run around. And so it's like these interesting things from our childhood where like you never think that there's going to be like a long tail of influence on these things. But sometimes our limitations become our strengths.
Oh my gosh. So you've written this amazing book, The Power of One, How I Found the Strength to Tell the Truth and Why I Blew the Whistle on Facebook. And it's this story of your professional journey through big tech, whereupon you ultimately end up at Facebook in 2019, and you were working in its civic integrity department. And so, how long? I'm just wondering, how long did it take before your spidey senses were tingling there? Whereas, like, something's amiss.
So I'm a little bit of an anomaly for someone who has like a lot of emphasis on data science or algorithms, in that I went and got an MBA. And I remember before I got an MBA, people said like this is a waste of time, like people at Google. And a big part about why I went was I came to appreciate how much organizational design matters, right? That we spend so much of our lives at work. The choices of how we design these spaces and like how we manage them are really, really significant in terms of impacting people's quality of life. But that meant that when I showed up at Facebook and things were just kind of like a little off, like they were more chaotic than seemed reasonable, or like the way decisions were being made just seemed greatly outside of bounds. When people would say to me things like, "Oh, this is just the way Silicon Valley is," I'd be like, "No, no, no, no. I've worked at enough
I
companies
was
now
going to
where like
say, because you worked at
I've
Pinterest, Google, you
yeah.
had, yeah.
Um, so I spent the vast majority of my tech career at Google, but I ended up spending some time at both the Yelp and at Pinterest before I ended up at Facebook. And which is a great example of how you can run into hiccups in your life. The only reason I ended up at those companies was because I got really sick, and my career kind of got deflected for a couple of years. But because I had been at these places, when people said to me things like, "Oh, no, 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 this is just the way Silicon Valley is," like I could look at it and interrogate that logic and say, like, one, why do they think that? And I think part of why some of the people who said that to me earnestly believed it was a lot of them had never worked anywhere but Facebook. They had come in
Mm.
straight out of college 5 years, 10 years before, and it just never left. Right. So they could say, like, oh, yeah, like everyone in Silicon Valley is as understaffed as we are, that kind of thing. Everyone struggles with hiring. And when like I knew, like, from looking at how these teams were run at other places, like, no, like other places who don't make anywhere near as much money as you do, who should struggle much more than you do hiring, like they're able to find people to do these jobs. So like, what's going on?
Hmm.
Um, or just things like, I tell the story towards the beginning of my time at Facebook of, Facebook appreciated that they were different enough internally that if you were going to do the job function I had, which is called product management, it was enough different at Facebook than at other places that they wanted all of the product managers to basically go through a boot camp for a few weeks. So like 2 weeks of boot camp where, they go in there and they give you a bunch of lectures on like, here's how this is done at Facebook. And my manager like pulled me out of that after like maybe 3 or 4 days. He was like,
Oh.
we have you have to write the plan for like what our team's going to do for the next 6 months, and like take a moment and just like think about the logistics on this. Like, I don't know anything about, I was supposed to work on misinformation in places that third party fact checking couldn't touch. Right. So this is most of the world. Most of the world doesn't have third party fact checkers. In times of crisis, even if there are third party fact checkers, they can't move fast enough. Right. Because like third party fact checking takes a few days to like research and those kinds of things. What do you do? So this is a novel space for the company. And I, knowing nothing, am supposed to write the plan for the next 6 months on like, after a week. And
Mm.
so it's just from the beginning, like my spidey sense was like, something is very, very wrong here. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what's wrong, but like enough things are happening that are not being done in even approximately ways that are similar to how they work elsewhere. Something is definitely off.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was kind of intuitive as well as, I mean, what you were seeing, but there was kind of that strong sense. Yeah. Was there like a turning point for you where, I mean, was it that point or
Mm.
was there a turning point at which you were like, okay.
I So it's interesting. Like I had a number of moments in the first 6 months where I was just like really shocked at the scope of like Facebook's influence, because like I had never thought about Facebook being the internet elsewhere in the world. Right. So for
Mhm.
most listeners, they're probably not aware that Facebook went into some of the most vulnerable places in the world, countries in Africa, countries in Southeast Asia, and said, hey, we noticed data costs $65 a gigabyte, costs $100 a gigabyte. If you use our products, your data is free, but if you use anything else on the open web, you're going to pay for it yourself. And lo and behold, somehow they became the internet for, I would say, a majority of languages in the world, right?
That's
80, 90%
fascinating.
of all the content available on the internet, only available on Facebook. But I knew that Facebook had done that. It's called zero rating. Um, but I hadn't really appreciated that, Facebook had followed that up by like not adequately investing in safety systems in those same places. Like they knew people didn't have any other options. So like, what are they going to do?
Right.
But I would say the first moment where I was like, this is out, like this is even outside of those bounds, was we were in the run up to the 2020 caucuses, like the Iowa caucuses. So this is like an event that I used to volunteer at as like in high school, because I wasn't old enough to vote. We'd go and we'd help collect ballots and like, set up chairs and make sure people have water and whatever. The Iowa caucuses is a really foundational thing about our democracy, because for decades they've been the first place
Right.
where candidates for president actually get voted on, right? And they've been hugely influential in how that influences who gets to be the candidate, who we get to vote for in November.
Mhm.
So in the run up to the caucuses in 2019 into 2020, I was sitting in our review where we we're going to pick out the plan for the first half of 2020, and my boss, or my boss's boss to be accurate, asks me, what am I going to have ready for Iowa? And I'm like, geographic misinformation, like geographically targeted misinformation, is like outside of our scope. Like we were told by the researchers that it doesn't happen very often, that sociographically targeted, this is like, people's age and sex and gender and interests and all these other things. Like that's much more common in terms of targeted misinformation than saying you live in this state or you live in this zip code, we're going to target you. But one of the few exceptions to that could be Iowa, right? Because Iowa has enough sway in terms of altering the course of an election that potentially targeted misinformation might actually have an impact in Iowa, right? And so I'm like, so yeah, we're not planning on doing anything, but I will go find out. I'll go find out what we can do for Iowa. And he's like, okay, come back to me. So it's the 17th of December or something. And I go and talk to the war room people. So these are the people who are like writing the software that's going to like run the war room, where we're all going to like sit around and like do what we can do to keep the Iowa caucuses safe. And I find out that they will not have the ability to look at individual states ready in time for the Iowa caucuses.
Oh.
And I was like, how did that happen? And it's just like they didn't have enough resources. It fell behind schedule, that kind of thing. But they're like, don't worry, we'll have it ready the week after. Like we'll have it ready for New Hampshire, or worse, we'll have it like ready for Nevada, right? Like so January rolls around and we get to have more meetings because people are like back from vacation. And I find out that I ask, so they tell me we can't actually support all the states. So we're going to have to choose to give some states support and other states are not going to get support because we'd have to pay too much money to store the data. We don't have budget for it. So we're going to pick some states and then like, that's how we're going to do it. And I was like, okay, cool. So like, are you going to pick like the early primaries and caucuses? And then like after they pass, like, are you going to move on to like the next primaries and caucuses? And they're like, oh, no. We're just going to do the swing states. And for context for people, swing states are states that are evenly divided politically. So like the reason why they might swing Republican or Democrat is because they have, approximately the similar number of Democrats and Republicans. And the only problem was in the 2020 primaries, the Republicans weren't voting. Like they had already picked Donald Trump was the candidate. He was the sitting president. He was the candidate. There weren't really primaries going on. And I was like, wait, you're only going to do the swing states? So like you're going to leave out California and New York, which make up like almost 50% of all the delegates for the Democrats. Are like, and the person in charge looked at me and said, why would that matter? Like she didn't understand. Like that how primaries work or like the role that they play in the democratic process. Like it's one of these things where we have
so fascinating how all of your background converged on this moment for you to recognize this is a major problem. And like people who were so busy, it's kind of like if you go to a doctor, and say you have shoulder pain and you go to a neurologist and they're going to tell you you've got, like a neurological problem. You go to a podiatrist, they're going to give you an orthotic for shoulder pain. You go to, a dentist, they're going to say, you're clenching your teeth. But it's like every person had their specialty, but you were uniquely qualified through your life experience as well as your education and everything else to see this umbrella effect. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And that's probably one of the reasons I can be like very empathetic about like how bad things got inside of Facebook, which is that one of the things that we need the public to be aware of is we are training technologists with like godlike powers. Every year what we can do with computers gets more magical. And yet, if you are an 18-year-old who wants to work at Google after you graduate, every class you take that's not a CS, like a computer science class, is going to make it less likely you're going to get hired at Google. Right. So we're getting even more specialists, even though they're able to wield more and more power.
Interesting. Okay, stick around because after the break, we're going to hear more about the inner workings of Facebook and what steps Frances Haugen believes we can take to right the wrongs of social media. We love what we do, and we wouldn't be able to do it without the generous donations provided by our listeners and followers. We want to extend special thanks to the Doctors Petty for their unwavering support of the podcast and organization. If you'd like to make a difference and contribute to the education and empowerment of families building their healthiest screen habits, please go to healthyscreenhabits.org, find the Take Action tab, and scroll down and click the Donate button. 100% of your donation will be used to spread awareness and bring families the tools they need to develop healthy screen habits. There was an algorithmic change that happened at Facebook in 2019. And I recognize that this was for political reasons, like you had just talked about, and kind of calming or, trying to not incite an outrage. But it would seem like kids kind of got caught in this crossfire. So like the same algorithms that promote outrage and extreme emotions on the political front don't turn off when a 14-year-old is looking at a disordered eating account. So I guess I'm asking for a help here because
I don't think they were made for political reasons. I think they were made for business reasons.
Okay, I misunderstood that.
So the change that gets talked about in the book is on the Facebook. So like, just like we were just talking about, this idea of Facebook thinks really acutely, like intently, about how do they get more content to be created, because Facebook is a two-sided marketplace. Like you go to eBay and there's like buyers and there's sellers. You can't have a buyer if you don't have someone selling, right? Or either or. In the case of social media, without creators, you can't have consumers. And most of us think about these places as places of consumption because most of what we do on them is we consume.
Right.
What Facebook found was that over time, and this is a phenomenon that happens at lots of social networks, people were creating less and less over time.
Okay.
And part of what fuels that is some people get more intent on the platform. Like they buy a drone and they buy a fancy camera and they start like making really beautiful content. And when people see that content, they go, Instagram is not for me. Right. I don't have a drone. Like I don't have a fancy camera. But the secondary thing is like Facebook was like, how can we try to turn this around? So this was on Facebook.com. It wasn't on Instagram. They're like, how can we turn this around? Like, how can we get people to just produce more content more often? And what they found was the only sustainable thing was getting people more social rewards. So that means more likes, more comments, more reshares, like making sure that that flow of social rewards, that engagement didn't stop. And so in 2018, Facebook started saying, we'll give more distribution to content that gets more engagement. Okay. And unfortunately, there was a side effect, which was the content we are drawn to engage with the most, like click on, put a comment on, is extreme content. So like the shortest path to a click is anger. And unfortunately, in the case of Instagram, those similar kinds of algorithms are in play. And I'll give you a really concrete example of what the consequences are. A journalist was interviewing me, and he had just had a new baby boy. So this is a happy, healthy baby boy, cute baby boy. That baby boy had an Instagram account because he's like a modern father. That account had maybe 5, quote, friends, which are other babies that are family friends. The only photos posted to any of these 5 accounts are cute, healthy, happy babies. And yet, about 10% of the content that filled this new father's feed was suffering children. It's like kids who have been mangled in accidents, kids who are laying in hospital beds with like tubes coming out of them, horribly disfigured kids who look like they're in pain. And he's like, how did we go from healthy, happy babies to this? Like, I haven't clicked on any of this stuff and it keeps coming back. It's like 10% of my feed. And I think what's happening there is these algorithms, dwelling even can be considered an act of engagement. If you just have it open on your screen and you don't continue to scroll by, they're like, oh, you liked it. And so and this is a great example of how the algorithms are agnostic. Like they don't know the significance, the meaning of what they're showing this person. It's kind of like they don't know that giving more disordered eating content to someone who's struggling with their own body dysmorphia is bad. Like they don't know that. All they know is if you like cute babies, you will not be able to scroll past this suffering child. If
Mm-hmm.
you are getting preoccupied about diet culture, you are going to like not scroll past this inspiration.
Mm-hmm. So, on behalf of parents who find this kind of like dangerous content on on
Mm-hmm.
their kids' accounts, is there a way to get around it? Like, what? How would you
Mm-hmm.
suggest? Like, can the user hack the algorithm? I guess is what I'm asking.
Um, I think it's really important if you have kids, you know, you were talking about digital tips.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to, and I actually think this is true even for adults. You know, it's very easy to have an algorithm drift over time. I'll give you an example. I got really sick in my late 20s and I had to relearn to walk, right? You know, I was paralyzed beneath my knees. It's really painful, took a long time, very isolating. I must have watched a bunch of really depressing stuff on Netflix because a couple years later, I got enough healthier and like stronger that I was like, wow, Netflix is really depressing. You know, I try to go find comedies, I try to find other stuff. And I was like fighting against the algorithm. um, I think it's really important to sit down with your kids and say, like, I'll show you my home feed. I'll show you what I'm looking at on Instagram. Like, this is what they're feeding me. Why don't we look at what your Instagram is feeding you? And make sure your kids understand how to. There's ways of indicating like you want to see less of certain kinds of content.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having that idea, like making your kids aware, hey, algorithms are just trying to fulfill their own needs. You know, they don't know the meaning of what they're doing, and that you need to you what we should have systems that are safe by default. That's what our kids actually deserve. But you do have the ability to shape these things, and always monitoring to see if you're being led to a more extreme place is a really important skill and a way we can care for each other.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's a really important part of, there's this kind of argument between digital literacy and digital citizenship and like
Mm,
what gets defined in what. And so I think that component is that, to me, that's as important as digital literacy, I mean, for health and wellness. But I like, yeah. Anyways. Okay.
because I think it's one of these things where like one of the most painful things you can experience is having someone get taken away from you by the algorithm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a thing that is not necessarily obvious to kids, but like watching someone go down the rabbit hole is hard. And
Mm-hmm.
like I'm super curious about what does care look like in the 21st century? If you and I are if you and I are friends, like what does it mean to care for each other in a world where there are digital algorithms that impact, like it's not just like, I come to your house. Like it used to be you could come to someone's house and you could see what magazines were on their table,
Yeah.
right? Like if they were starting to drift, you could see.
Right.
And now people end up, sometimes struggling in silence for long periods of time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. So earlier you talked about how Facebook kind of became the internet for
Mm-hmm.
people globally, like, developing nations. And in your book, The Power of One, you task us with fixing Facebook, not killing it. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, if I were to substitute social media for Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that Facebook is not alone and the healthiest
Mm,
path will be the path forward, figuring out as we
mm,
go.
mhm.
So do you have an idea on how do we fix social media? Next week, on part 2 of this episode, learn how Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, believes we can tackle the issue of fixing social media and create the healthiest path forward. In the meantime, you can check out her book, The Power of One, as well as a complete transcript of this episode by clicking on the show notes. Do that by going to healthyscreenhabits.org. Click on the podcast button and scroll to find this episode. If you're interested in learning about more topics surrounding healthy screen habits, check out our episodes by topic lists, where you can find a library of previous podcast episodes listed by topic. So thank you so much for listening, and be sure to tune in next Wednesday to hear the rest of this very important conversation with Frances Haugen, a true healthy screen habits hero. For more information, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Healthy Screen Habits. Make sure to visit our website, healthyscreenhabits.org, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or via RSS, so you'll never miss an episode. It's free, it's fun, and you get a healthy new screen habit each week. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate you giving us a quick rating. It really does help other people find us and spread the word of healthy screen habits. Or if you'd simply like to tell a friend, we'd love that too. I so appreciate you spending your time with me this week, and I look forward to learning more healthy habits together.